The photograph is less than 4 inches wide. Its paper is brittle, the edges yellowed, and it gives off a faint scent of dust and aged timber. Captured in New Orleans, Louisiana, during the spring of 1870, only 5 years after the Civil War concluded. It represents a chapter of American history where freedom was still novel, tenuous, and vigorously defended. Pictured within it is a black family of 5, posed with remarkable dignity. The father stands erect on the left, his jaw firm with subdued pride, a hand placed on the shoulder of his wife, who sits with flawless poise at the center. Behind them hangs a simple studio backdrop. Around them are their 3 children, aged 8, 5, and 3, dressed in attire that appears excessively refined, excessively purposeful, for a family that history was supposed to overlook. For more than 100 years, this photograph remained in a private collection, unrecorded and unseen. Then a researcher enlarged it, and what she discovered in the gaze of the youngest child, a 3-year-old boy perched on his mother's lap, looking straight into the lens, left her stunned. One eye was dark brown, the other pale green, and that singular biological trait would unravel a mystery extending back 200 years, spanning an ocean, and reshaping the narrative of a family that history was determined to erase. Before we proceed, do you sense there's untapped potential within you? Then follow the link in the first pinned comment to explore ancestral wisdom on mind, consciousness, and personal growth for those seeking a life of greater purpose and clarity. And if this story touches you, be sure to subscribe and leave a like. That way, more people can discover stories like this one. The call arrived on a Tuesday morning in March 2019, and Dr. Nydia Osei almost chose not to answer. She was occupied with grading undergraduate papers at Howard University's Department of Genetics and African Diaspora Studies. A dual role that most of her peers still found peculiar, though she had long ceased trying to justify it. For Nydia, genetics and history were not separate fields. They were the same dialogue, expressed in different tongues. The caller was a colleague from the Magnified Research Center in New Orleans, Professor Roland Tate, who had devoted the past 30 years to organizing records related to Black life in the post-Civil War South. His voice, when she answered, carried the measured, restrained tone of someone trying not to betray excessive enthusiasm. "I've come across something," he said, "in a private donation we received last year from an estate in Treme. A photograph. I believe you need to see it." Nydia traveled to New Orleans 3 days later. The Magnified Research Center was housed in several rooms within Tilton Hall at Tulane University. Roland greeted her at the entrance, the photograph already in his grasp, secured within an acid-free archival sleeve. He held it with the care of someone handling an object they're not fully convinced is genuine. The image itself was a carte visite, a small, card-mounted photograph common in the 1860s and 1870s, created in professional studios and circulated like calling cards among families who could afford them. That fact alone was remarkable. Black families in New Orleans in 1870, just 5 years post-emancipation, were not typically the patrons of professional photographers. The family in the picture was arranged with evident attention. The father, a broad-shouldered man in a dark wool coat, stood on the left with a stillness suggesting he was used to being observed. His wife occupied a high, back chair in the middle, dressed in a garment with precise pleating at the collar. 3 children surrounded them, 2 older boys standing behind and a smaller child, clearly the youngest, seated on his mother's lap. Nydia examined the photograph for an extended silence. Then Roland handed her a magnifying loupe. "Examine the youngest one," he said softly. "Look at his eyes." She pressed the loupe to the image, leaned closer, and felt her breath escape. The child's right eye was dark brown. His left was pale green. The donation included a handwritten note, he said, placing a small folded paper on the table beside the archival sleeve. The family who gave it said it had been passed through 4 generations. Based on the paper quality and photographic process, it's estimated to be from 1868 to 1872. New Orleans, almost certainly. Nadia turned back to the image. The child appeared about 2 or 3 years old, seated sideways on his mother's lap, his face angled directly at the camera. His expression was serious. Most children from that era wore such looks, given the lengthy exposure times required. Yet his eyes were wide open and distinctly visible, even in the faded print. 2 different colors, beyond doubt. "This is Heterochromia iridis," Nadia murmured, more to herself than to Roland. "A variation in iris pigmentation between the 2 eyes. It can arise from several causes: injury, illness, a developmental irregularity. But in this setting, in a black child in 1870, the most plausible explanation is a genetic mutation." "Is it uncommon?" Roland asked. "Complete heterochromia. 2 entirely different eye colors. Occurs in about 2 out of every 1,000 individuals," she said. "But that's across the general population. Among people of West African descent, the combination this child seems to have, dark brown in one eye, green in the other, is far rarer. It points to a very specific variant of the OCA2 gene, which regulates melanin production in the iris." She set the loop down gently. "The OCA2 variant responsible for green pigmentation in one eye, while the other retains normal melanin levels, is noted in scientific studies. However, it has only been observed in living populations in one particular geographic region." Roland waited. "The Volta River Basin," she said. "Northern Ghana. A population cluster in the upper eastern region that has remained genetically secluded for centuries because of terrain. Mountains on 3 sides, limited interaction with outside groups. The variant appears in roughly 1 in 4,000 people there. Beyond that group, it's virtually non-existent." Roland gazed at her. "You're suggesting that child's eyes can reveal where his ancestors came from?" "I'm suggesting," Nadia replied cautiously, "that if that child's DNA matches what I suspect, this photograph just became the most significant piece of evidence I have ever encountered." The materials that accompanied the photograph were scarce. A small bundle of documents wrapped in oilcloth, which the estate's executor had included almost as an afterthought. Roland had catalogued them briefly upon arrival, but hadn't scrutinized them closely until now. Together, he and Nadia carefully laid out the contents across the examination table. Among them was a folded land deed, partly water-damaged, for a property in New Orleans' Treme neighborhood, dated 1871. There was also a small prayer card from a Catholic church, its ink faded to near illegibility. And there was a single handwritten page, not a letter, but what seemed to be a partial family record, the kind many freed black families in the post-war South kept privately, often due to the absence of official documentation that had been systemically denied them. The handwriting was precise and educated. At the top of the page, a name Elias, beneath it a woman's name Cora, and below those 3 children listed by name and birth year: James, Samuel born 1865, Thomas born 1867, Thomas the youngest born in 1867, which would have made him 3 years old at the time of the photograph, if it was taken in 1870. Nadia photographed each document with her phone and then stood silently for a moment, staring at the page. "Elias and Cora," she said. "No surnames recorded." "That was common," Roland said. "Many freed families in this period used only first names in private records, particularly in Louisiana. Surnames were problematic. Some adopted the names of former enslavers. Others selected new ones. Some avoided them entirely because of the legal and social burdens they carried." Nadia nodded slowly, still focused on the page. Thomas, she whispered. The boy with the mismatched eyes, seated on his mother's lap, gazing into a camera with the seriousness of someone far older. A child born just 2 years after a war fought partly so he could exist in freedom. She turned back to Roland. I need to locate living descendants, she said. If Thomas survived to adulthood and had children, and if they can be found, a DNA sample could verify everything. That's 150 years of family history to trace, Roland said. I know, she replied. Where do we begin? Nadia returned to Howard and spent the following 2 weeks immersed in Reconstruction-era records. The 1870 and 1880 U.S. Federal censuses, Freedmen's Bureau documents, church baptismal registers from New Orleans parishes, and the digital collections of the Louisiana State Archives in Baton Rouge. The difficulty was clear from the start. Elias was one of the most common names among freed black men in the post-Civil War South. The Freedmen's Bureau records for Louisiana alone listed over 200 men named Elias in New Orleans between 1865 and 1875. Without a surname, narrowing the search required painstaking effort. But the land deed provided a foothold. The Treme property deed from 1871 specified a parcel on 18 Claude Avenue. Cross-referencing that address with the 1870 census, she located a household entry: Elias, age 34, laborer; Cora, age 29, James, age 8, Samuel, age 5, Thomas, age 3. Her breath caught. The ages matched perfectly. The 1880 census showed the same family, a decade older, still on 17 Claude Avenue. Thomas was now 13, recorded as attending school. His father, Elias, was listed as a carpenter, an advancement from laborer, indicating a decade of careful, steady progress. Then the trail went cold. The 1890 census, which would have shown Thomas as a young adult, had been largely destroyed in a 1921 fire at the Commerce Building in Washington, D.C. It was one of the most devastating losses in American genealogical history, and it erased countless black family narratives entirely. The 1900 census listed a Thomas in New Orleans, matching the age, working as a dock worker, married to a woman named Iris, with 2 children. But Nadia couldn't confirm it was the same individual. She called Roland. I may have traced him through 1900, she said, but I need to connect him to living descendants. I'm going to need genealogical assistance, someone who specializes in black Southern families. Roland didn't hesitate. Contact Josephine Marks, he said. She's in Atlanta. She's been tracking black Louisiana families for 30 years. If Thomas has living relatives, she'll find them. Nadia wrote down the name. Outside her office window, the Washington sky was a muted gray of early spring. She looked at the photograph once more, at Thomas, at his 2 dissimilar eyes, and felt the full weight of what she was attempting settle on her shoulders. I'm coming, she thought. Just hold on. Josephine Marks picked up the phone on the second ring. Within 60 seconds, Nadia understood why Roland had recommended her without reservation. She was 71, had retired from the Atlanta public school system 2 decades ago, and had spent every year since assembling one of the most thorough private databases of black Southern genealogy in the country. She kept her records in a converted bedroom of her Decatur home. Floor to ceiling shelves of binders, 3 computer monitors operating simultaneously, and a wall-mounted map of Louisiana covered in colored pins. Born in New Orleans in 1867, Thomas. His father, Elias; his mother, Cora. Their address on St. Claude Avenue in Treme. Josephine repeated the details back, her voice quick and exact. Give me a week. She called back in only 4 days. I found him, she said. And Nadia could detect the satisfaction threading through her words. That distinct pleasure of a woman who had devoted decades to this work and still felt the thrill with every discovery. Thomas lived until 1931. He and his wife Iris raised 4 children. 3 of them reached adulthood. 1 granddaughter, named Della, Relocated to Chicago in 1943 during the Great Migration. Della had 2 sons. One of them, Curtis, is still alive today. He's 83 years old and resides in Evanston, a suburb of Chicago. Nydia sat motionless. "Does he know about the photograph?" she asked. "He has no idea it exists," Josephine said. "But I found a number for his daughter. Her name is Patricia. She's in her 50s, lives nearby. She's the one you should contact first." Nydia thanked Josephine quietly and remained still for a long while after hanging up. A living descendant, a direct line from that 3-year-old boy in the image, the child with 1 brown eye and 1 green, perched on his mother's lap in a New Orleans studio in 1870, to a woman named Patricia living in Evanston, Illinois in 2019. 149 years. The expanse between then and now suddenly felt remarkably narrow. She lifted the receiver again and dialed. It rang 3 times. Then a woman's voice, warm yet slightly guarded. "Hello. My name is Dr. Nydia Osi," she said carefully. "I'm a geneticist at Howard University, and I believe I've found something that rightfully belongs to your family." Patricia drove to Evanston from her Rogers Park apartment and met Nydia at a coffee shop 2 weeks later. Nydia had flown in from Washington specifically for this conversation. Patricia was 54, a high school history teacher with short, natural hair and the measured, observant demeanor of someone accustomed to weighing situations before fully engaging. She sat across from Nydia, hands wrapped around her coffee cup, and listened without interruption as Nydia laid out everything. The photograph, the archival discovery, the heterochromia, the OCA2 variant, the census trail that had wound from Thomas to Della to Curtis, and finally to her. When Nydia finished, Patricia was silent for a stretch. "My grandfather Curtis used to speak about his grandmother Della," she said at last. "She came up from New Orleans as a young woman. He said she always kept a photograph. Something very old, he called it. The family picture. But it was lost somewhere during the move north. He searched for it for years." She paused. "He stopped mentioning it when I was a teenager. I think he eventually accepted it was gone." Nydia reached into her bag and placed a high-resolution print of the photograph on the table between them. Patricia studied it for a prolonged silence. Her gaze moved slowly across the image. The father standing on the left, the mother seated at the center, the 2 older boys behind, and finally the youngest, the boy on his mother's lap. Her hand rose to her mouth. "The eyes," she murmured.
"Yes,"
Nydia said. Patricia looked up. Nydia noticed for the first time that Patricia's own eyes were both dark brown, but encircling her left iris, faintly visible, was a subtle irregular ring of green pigmentation. Not full heterochromia, but a trace, a remnant. The gene had not vanished. It had merely quieted, passed down through generations in a diluted form, waiting to be seen. "What does this mean?" Patricia asked. "Scientifically. I mean, what exactly are you searching for? I need a DNA sample from you, and ideally from your father, Curtis." Nydia said, "If the OCA2 variant exists in your family's genome in the configuration I suspect, I can pinpoint exactly where in West Africa your lineage originates." Patricia set down her coffee. "How precisely?" she asked. "To the region," Nydia said. "Possibly to the ethnic group. Maybe even closer." The samples arrived at the Howard University genetics lab on a Thursday morning. Buccal swabs from both Patricia and her father Curtis, who had agreed to participate after a lengthy phone call with Nydia, during which she had spoken little but listened intently. Curtis was 83 and had grown up hearing fragments of a story he could never fully piece together. His grandmother Della, who had partially raised him in Chicago after his own mother died young, spoke of New Orleans with a blend of pride and sorrow. She once told him their family had come from far away, farther than anyone knew. He had dismissed it as an old woman's poetry. Now he wasn't so sure. Nadia and her graduate assistant, Devon, a specialist in population genomics, ran the full analysis over the following 10 days. The results were definitive. The OCA2 variant, present in both Patricia and Curtis, partially suppressed across generations of genetic mixing, was a specific single nucleotide polymorphism designated RS1D-407, occurring in conjunction with 2 additional rare variants on the same gene, locus that together produced the distinctive iris pigmentation, visible in the 1870 photograph. This 3-variant combination had been documented in scientific literature only once before, in a 2014 population genetic study of communities in the Upper East region of Ghana. Near the town of Boku, within a cluster of villages along the Gambaga escarpment. The study identified the combination in roughly 1 in 4,000 individuals within that specific population and noted its near complete absence in all other surveyed populations worldwide. Devon looked up from the screen as the analysis concluded. "That's extraordinary," he said quietly. Nadia was already on the phone with a colleague, Dr. Kwame Asante at the University of Ghana's Genetics Department. Someone she had collaborated with twice before and trusted implicitly. "Kwame," she said when he answered, "I need to know if there are living family clusters in the Boku area carrying the RS1D-407 combination with the 2 flanking variants I'm about to send you. I think I've found a diaspora connection dating back to the slave trade era." A pause on the other end. "Send me the data," Kwame said. "And Nadia, if this is what you believe it is, you need to prepare yourself for what comes next." She glanced at the photograph pinned above her desk. Thomas's mismatched eyes stared back across 150 years. "I know," she said. "Send me what you find." Dr. Kwame Asante worked swiftly. He referenced the variant data Nadia provided against his department's existing genomic database. One of the most comprehensive in West Africa, built over 15 years of fieldwork across 12 countries. Within a week, he had a preliminary answer. The 3-variant OCA2 combination appeared in his database in samples from 11 individuals, all from the same geographic cluster. 4 villages in the Boku Municipal District of the Upper East region of Ghana, situated along the rocky lower slope of the Gambaga escarpment. The villages were small. The largest had fewer than 800 residents, and had maintained strong genetic isolation due to both geography and cultural practice. They belonged to the Kusasi ethnic group, an agricultural people who had inhabited the region for centuries. But what Kwame found next prompted him to call Nadia immediately rather than wait for a written report. In the oral history records, held by the University of Ghana's Institute of African Studies, there was a documented account collected in 1987 from an elder in one of the 4 villages. It described the forced removal of a large number of people from the area during the late 18th century. The account named a specific event: a raid by slave traders operating through the Ashanti middleman network, targeting the Kusasi settlements along the escarpment during a period of regional instability around 1790 to 1810. The elder had named families, named clans, and described with the precision of oral tradition passed across generations a man taken in one of the raids. A man known in the village as having one eye dark as earth and one eye light as river water. Nadia felt the room shift around her as Kwame read that line aloud over the phone. "It's him," she said, barely a whisper. "Or his father, or his grandfather. Someone in that line. The genetic and historical evidence together are very strong," Kwame said carefully. "We cannot be 100% certain without direct genealogical documentation from the Ghanaian side, but the convergence, the variant, the geographic specificity, the oral history, the physical description, is by any reasonable scientific standard compelling. I need to go there." Nadia said. I thought you'd say that. Quaim replied. I'll arrange it. Nadia landed in Accra on a humid Tuesday evening and drove north the following morning with Quaim, a translator named Abina, and a University of Ghana doctoral student named Fifi, who had grown up in the Upper East region and knew the area intimately. The drive from Accra to Baku took nearly 12 hours. North through the Ashanti region, past Kumasi, into the flat savanna of the north, where the landscape opened up and the sky became immense. They arrived after dark and slept in a guest house in Baku town. The following morning, Fifi drove them the final 20 kilometers to the villages along the escarpment. The village elder who received them was a man in his late 70s named Adongo. He had been briefed by the local district cultural officer about the nature of the visit and sat with them under a large neem tree at the edge of the compound with the composed, unhurried manner of someone who understood that some conversations require the full weight of patience. Nadia showed him the photograph on her laptop screen. The 1870 image of the family of 5 posed in a New Orleans studio, dressed in their finest clothes, staring into the camera. Adongo looked at it for a long time without speaking. Around them, the sounds of the village. Children, chickens, the distant rhythm of someone working, continued uninterrupted. Then he leaned forward and pointed to Thomas, the youngest child on his mother's lap. He said something in Kusal that Abena translated softly. The eyes of the Adeline. Nadia looked at Quaim. He recognizes the trait. Quaim murmured. It's known in the village, associated with a specific family lineage. Adongo spoke again at length, and Abena translated in careful sections. The Ada family had been among those taken in the late 18th century raids. The oral history recorded their names. The trait, one dark eye, one light, had appeared in that line for as far back as memory extended, and it had not been seen in the village since the raids. It was regarded as a mark of the family, something that had departed with them and never returned. Until now. Nadia turned the laptop toward Adongo and let him study the photograph once more. Tell him, she said to Abena, her voice steady despite everything surging within her, that they survived. Tell him the family survived. The video call took 3 months to arrange. There were logistics, time zones, technology access, translation, the careful emotional preparation of everyone involved. And Nadia navigated it, all with the methodical patience the work demanded. But beneath the logistics, she felt the significance of what was about to unfold with a clarity she had rarely experienced in 2 decades of scientific endeavor. On a Sunday morning in November 2019, Curtis sat in his Evanston living room with Patricia beside him, a laptop open on the coffee table. On the screen, connected from a community center in Baku, sat 3 members of the Ada family, a man named Erasmus, his sister Agnes, and an elder woman. Their grandmother, who had lived her entire life on the escarpment and had heard the story of the taken ones since childhood. Nadia served as the bridge, with Abena translating from Kuzol and Patricia, translating family history from the American side. It was not a dramatic meeting in the cinematic sense. There were no shouts, no immediate tears, no single overwhelming moment. It was quieter than that, and more profound. Curtis, who had said little through the entire process, leaned forward when the elder woman on the screen began to speak. Abena translated her words slowly. She was recounting the names from the oral history, the names of those taken, and among them, a name, a man's name, the one associated with the eyes that had been preserved in village memory for over 200 years. Curtis listened to the name. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, very softly, "My grandmother Della used to say that name. I thought it was just something old she remembered. I didn't know it meant anything. It had meant everything. It had traveled from a village on a West African escarpment, across the Atlantic Ocean, through the horror of the Middle Passage, through slavery, through emancipation, through the Great Migration, through a century and a half of silence, carried in the DNA of a child who sat on his mother's lap in a New Orleans photography studio in 1870 and looked directly into a camera with one dark eye and one pale green eye, as if he knew somehow that someone would eventually look back. The photograph had never been just a photograph. It had been a message, written in the oldest language there is, the language of blood, of inheritance, of a family that refused to be erased despite every obstacle placed before it. And now, at last, it had been read. Just a reminder. You don't need more motivation. You need a system that will make you act right now. If you want to develop discipline, eliminate procrastination, and build an unwavering mindset, click the link in the description and discover how to transform knowledge into daily action.